online and here on site. Thank you very much for being present here for this session of our Science as a Public Sphere seminar. So today it's a very great pleasure to welcome here in Oxford Anne-Caroline Prévôt. Anne-Caroline Prévôt is a researcher with the CNRS in Paris. She's a member of a research unit called the Center for Conservation Science, a joint unit with CNRS, Sorbonne University, which is one of the new reunited universities in Paris, the National Natural History Museum. So Anne-Sophie has a background in ecology, and she's a specialist of conservation biology. But she decided to join ecology and the social sciences, and work is at the border between psychology and conservation science. So Anne-Caroline did a lot of work with her students on many objects as different as zoos, games, films, books, art, and her main endeavor is to try to analyze the relationships between humans and the diversity and also the vulnerability of nature. She's recently the author of a book that you might see here on the screen. So this book is called in French La nature à l'œil nu. We do hope that this book will have soon a translation in English, because it's really of interest for large number of communities, ecologists, conservationists, but also psychologists, social scientists, the academia, but also all the people involved in conservation in the broad sense. So how could you translate La nature à l'œil nu? So it could be, well, nature to the naked eye would be an approximative translation. Perhaps it will be done better when the book is translated in English. But anyway, so today Anne-Caroline will present the current state of her work and the developments she thinks about for the next future. And for those of you who are available tomorrow morning at 10 at the Oxford Martin School, there will be a discussion and a presentation of Anne-Caroline's book. So I won't say much more. We are very delighted to have this seminar today with my colleagues, co-organizers of the seminar, Moen Slarke, Judith Renorn. We are very happy to launch this discussion on how nature and nature conservation are debated, discussed in the public sphere. And so now, Anne-Caroline, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pascal. And hello, everyone of here. And I'm very happy to be here. And as Pascal said, I'm trained as an ecologist, and now I'm a conservation biologist. And I became a conservation biologist because I got a permanent position in 1998. So, yes. So what is conservation biology? Conservation biology has been defined by Michael Soulet in 1984-85 in Conservation Biology in Bioscience Journal as a crisis discipline. And so Michael Soulet said that conservation biology differs from most other biological sciences. In one important way, it is often a crisis discipline. So in crisis disciplines, he says, one must act before knowing all the facts. And crisis disciplines are thus a mixture of science and art. And their pursuit requires intuition as well as information. So he said, as conservation biologists, we may have to make decisions or recommendations about design and management before we are completely comfortable with a theoretical and empirical basis on the analysis. So we have to tolerate uncertainty sometimes and very often. So from all these years, I have developed various research programs and questions, and then I propose to present and discuss with you examples from these programs, just to talk about some issues on about the communication of science research in the public sphere in conservation biology. So let's start with the slider turtles. The slider turtles, so this is a pet introduced in France and Europe in the 90s and massively released by the owner to French rivers and ponds. And I think in Great Britain it's the same. And they come from the US. So I started my career by implementing a research program on slider turtles. And this program was focused on the impact on these species in local fauna and flora in French ponds and rivers, because slider turtles are freshwater turtles. And actually they were sold as pets when they were young, and they were just said that they were not young, but it was a very small species. But when the owner took care of the slider turtles very well, then they grew and they become large, and they can live more than 30 years. So it's not very, well, many people just release them in the ponds. So, and beyond scientific knowledge, our research program wanted to provide information to public authorities and the so-called general public, that is here the turtles owners, in order to decrease the number of releases in nature, because these releases are forbidden in France. So education messages that have been deployed in the public sphere, but not from our programs, but from the organization, NGOs, and local authorities. They present turtles as monsters, both for frogs here and for the local turtle species. So here you have an example of a poster from a public education campaign that says that the turtle, this is a killer turtle. And so we have just released the person hunter who destroys everything. The slider turtle is carnivorous, aggressive, and voracious. Let's run away. So, but at the same time of when I was working on this program, so my children were young, and we received a very popular magazine for young and children named Pomme d'Api in French. And in 2007, in this Pomme d'Api, in the last few pages, there were different drawings proposed to help the readers to think about happiness. And here you have some examples, like having presents, offering presents, dancing, playing, reading with my mom, and at the very bottom, left, right, down right, releasing my fish in the river. So we showed here that these two messages are not very consistent with each other. And for the people that know, then the turtles is very dangerous. And for the public owner, the turtles or the fish can be, it can be an easy way to take care of the turtles, to release it in the pond. So we designed a scientific program, and we showed through experimental designs that yes, introduced slider turtles do eat frogs and many other animals and plants. They are omnivorous, but no, the presence of 4 adult sliders in a small pond did not make frogs to disappear. So it's different between saying that turtles eat frogs and that saying that turtles just make frogs disappearing. So I presented these results in a national seminar of nature manager, named in France Forum des Gestionnaires. And the only remark from the public was, this cannot be true because you were not in natural conditions. We all know that in nature, sliders are devastating. Okay, so no comment. So in this program, we developed communication and management tools in these programs in order to prevent releases in the wild. So we constructed a kit of exhibition posters, a film, education kit, cartoons, and so on and so on. And we started to deploy and to propose all these education kits in the public schools and other audience. And the positive points of this program were that the same scientific information was delivered through various channels. And we have worked with professional artists or journalists to invent, design, and create all these tools. However, these tools didn't reach the audience and they were not used at all. So the negative point is that maybe we didn't ask the public about what they need, and we did not construct our messages with the target people, at least the teachers, and maybe that's why these education kits were not used. So these tools have not been broadcasted and they have not been used with much success. So I thought that working with introduced species was complicated, because first, I did not agree with the so-called consensus on this issue in my own scientific community. It was very complicated to work on sliders because I was not a naturalist and was not a specialist. So I was just all what I could say was not considered as true from the so-called specialists. So I left the slider turtles because I didn't want to argue more. And I started to work on a very common species in cities named the pigeons. So you know all the pigeons. And this species is very common in all cities throughout the world. And most, if not all, urban populations are feral. So that is, pigeons, urban pigeons are the descendants of captive rock doves. The scientific name is Columba livia. And they were domesticated for food or as homing pigeons for military reasons, for instance. And in Paris, the first feral pigeons appeared at the beginning of the 20th century, between the two world wars, when big factories left the city and the workers too. And so then all the domesticated pigeons were released in the city and they became feral. Now, urban pigeons are considered by most French municipalities as problematic for at least the following reasons. So they are claimed to be too numerous and increasing populations. They are claimed to be dangerous for human health. And they are claimed to be detrimental for buildings because of their droppings. And as for the slider turtle, the public authority, they delivered some messages to the public. And for example, here, there is a poster in the entrance of all very small public parks in Paris, and which says, if you like birds, do not feed them, and why? And with some reasons not to feed the birds. And you have the same in London, actually. Yeah. Do not feed pigeons. So feeding birds make them human dependent. Bird feeding is bad for the health of birds. It favors groups of birds and other populations that favors the development of diseases. And birds feeding degrades the environment, pollutes the aquatic environment, favors the development of harmful species. And it's written in red, and even in English, feeding birds is not allowed. Offenders will be prosecuted. Okay. So we developed a first interdisciplinary program in urban pigeons with many different people coming from ecology, genetics, epidemiology, social sciences, anthropology, and also some artists from dancing and some NGOs protecting for nature protection or bird and animal protections. And we have been working in this program for at least almost 10 years. So it was very interesting, and we did a lot of work and very interesting work. And we published scientific papers. We published scientific papers on pigeons' dynamics and genetics, some scientific papers on pigeons' health, some other papers on pigeons and people, pigeons and governance. We also made some dissemination papers and artworks, like documentary film, artistic video with dancing. We invented the citizen science program to propose city dwellers to photograph the pigeons and to assess the colors of the pigeons as an indicator of the quality of the urban environment. And we published a guide for local authorities and organized a seminar toward these stakeholders to disseminate the results of our scientific research. So as I said, this program lasted 10 years and it was great for different reasons. Some are listed here. For example, we made pigeons exist in the public space. We as a group shared different world vision, and we in a group changed our relations to pigeons. However, regarding communication toward others, now I can say that this program almost failed. And I can give 2 examples. So the citizen science program Couleur de Pigeon did not attract anyone. So it was properly constructed. It includes scientific objectives. So that was the mapping the diversity of pigeons' colors as an indicator of the quality of urban environment. We built a scientific protocol. We communicated through a dedicated website, a poster, and so on. But there are 2 main reasons can be proposed to explain this failure. First, this program and the public was not mandatory to get this information. And actually, we got all this information with a PhD student. And second, pigeons are not interesting for people, even and especially for bird watcher. So I didn't keep the scientific email we got at this occasion, but it was a very long email written from a bird watcher. And he said, I just remember a part of this email saying, you know, I'm a bird watcher. I'm just a member of the NGO, and I love birds. I love bird watching, but I would never stoop to watching urban pigeons. So this is we didn't anticipated this kind of relation. And the second example is when we organized the seminar for local authorities, the public seemed interested. And I remember that at the end of the seminar, I declared that our program will stop now because we didn't have any more financial support, but that we could be happy to go on if some cities were interested to co-construct new research questions by providing some resources. I did not get any feedback, and the program actually stopped. So maybe our results were not consistent with the local public policies of the municipalities at that time. And we, including myself, were convinced that scientific robust results would be dominant to make local authorities reconsider their policies. We were actually completely prisoner of the deficit model. And this is a problem because actually the big issue today is the disappearance of biodiversity. So nature is disappearing. So nature here, I define nature as with this term, so a diversity of living beings, always interacting with each other. That is, I define it as a dynamic and unpredictable assemblage of species, both in space and time, with no need of humans to exist. And it's not our enemies, it's not our friends. And nature, we as humans are dependent from nature. So for example, here, in France, for example, the abundance of common birds strongly decreased for specialist species, at least specialist species from agricultural landscapes in the last 30 years. And these are scientific data. And these data are coming partly from my colleagues in the museum, thanks to citizen science programs. And throughout the years, scientific communities delivered this message in the national public media without any significant change for the birds. So the question is, could be that nature and biodiversity are not considered as important for decision makers and the so-called public sphere. So remember this anticipation novel you all know maybe, Brave New World from Aldous Huxley, written in 1931. So at the very beginning of the novel, a group of students visit the conditioning center of babies in this world. And the director of this center is very proud to explain to the students that children are conditioned to hate books and flowers. And so concerning nature, he explains, yes, so he said, they will grow up with what the psychologists used to call an instinctive hatred of books and flowers, reflexes unalterably conditioned. They will be saved from books and botany all their lives. And it explains that primrose and landscapes have one grave defect: they are gratuitous. A love of nature keeps the factories busy. No, keeps no factories busy. So it I decided to abolish the love of nature, at any rate among the lower classes. Okay, this novel is a fiction, and it was written in 1931. So actually now, the nature is maybe disappearing for our cultural products. For example, two authors, Kessebier and Kessebier, wrote a paper in 2017, and they studied the relative importance of more than 180 common words relating to nature in English popular cultural products from 1970. And they showed that the same trends in three independent corpus: but fiction novels, song lyrics, and film storylines. So the common terms relating to nature are decreasing relatively to other terms in all these products. A research team in Australia surveyed the environment type of the settings in the picture of award children books throughout the years from 1950s to 2010. And they found that natural environment decreased in the profit of built environments, both well in the image and the drawings of the children books. So I did the same kind of analysis with the Disney films. So I showed that from the 1937 to 2010, in the 60 Disney films that were produced during this period, the time proportion of natural settings presented in outdoor settings, the time proportion of settings where nature is presented and is present, globally decreased with the time. And more in details, in the 80s, there are some films that just appeared where in outdoor setting there is no more nature. Well, nature here was described as the green plants. And this summer, as part of the project of urban nature, I watched the 30 biggest science fiction blockbusters, and I assessed the quality and importance of nature in them. So in addition to this project, I also watched some blockbusters with superheroes, and the results are the same. So very rare and very controlled vegetation, present only for utilitarian purposes, mainly for food. So for example, the fields in Interstellar, the French-style garden of the capital in Hunger Games, the streets planted with a few rare trees, and the bare lawns in Transformers, Mars, or Inceptions. So when it was less controlled, the nature is most often very dangerous for humans. Those humans who dare to venture there. So for example, the forest of the Hunger Games arena, or the Navy forest in Avatar. And there is some kind of more wild and bucolic nature, but this is presented only in very happy scenes of memories or romance. The scenes of flirtation between Anakin and Padme in Star Wars, or those in Hunger Games or in Inception. So actually, but in 2012, I personally discovered the conservation psychology, and conservation psychology and I started to integrate this discipline and other social sciences, such as political sciences and communication, in my research. So conservation psychology has been defined by Carol Sanders in 2003 as a scientific study of the reciprocal relationships between humans and the rest of nature, with a particular focus on how to encourage conservation of the natural world. Conservation psychology, she said, uses psychological principles theory or methods to understand and solve issues related to human aspects of conservation. So different researchers in psychology have referring now to conservation psychology, notably Susan Clayton, who edited recently a handbook of environmental and conservation psychology in Oxford University Press. So some of the following statements did have a real impact on my way of thinking as an ecologist and conservation biologist. This statement has been published by a conservation psychology West Schultz in the Conservation Biology Journal. So both disciplines are very much more and more interacting with each other. So West Schultz said that education does not typically result in increases in conservation behavior. Indeed, it was exactly the case for slider turtles and pigeons. And other authors explain that individual emotions, attitudes, values, and identity are very important in coping with conservation and environmental programs. And yes, and regarding education and knowledge, it is also very important to account for different types of knowledge, scientific, of course, but also procedural or local, folk, and yes, and local and empirical knowledge. So the second point is that human thinking is biased and promotes short-sighted responses to environmental threats. So it could explain why biodiversity is not considered as the main problem now. The third one is that individuals generally perceive themselves as separate from nature. It is what I confirm with the blockbusters and the Disney films. So however, yeah, no problem. And the last one is that social norms guide behavior. Indeed, in pigeons and urban nature, social norms especially guides behavior. But I just realized afterward that there is a large diversity of social norms, and they are not considered all as legitimate in our modern societies, and this could be a problem to cope as well. So for 10 years now, I've been working on the concept of experience of nature together with Susan Clayton, the conservation psychologist I was talking about just before. So with Susan Clayton and students, we eventually defined experiences of nature as a process that includes one or several meetings or of encounters with elements of nature and with different dimensions in the center of the image here. And these meetings, they include several dimensions: cognitive, emotional, embedded, social, memorial. And this meeting, they resonate differently for individuals, depending, of course, of the type of nature encountered, but also on individual characteristics, such as his history, environmental values, knowledge, etc. And third, depending on the social context, social norms, but also regulations on nature. Yes, regulations. So this is the precursors. And these meetings are experience of nature as soon as they have consequences or outcomes, again at 3 levels: the individual first, but also the nature and potentially the society. So with these thinkings, I realized that how important it is to legitimate the diversity of individual experiences of nature together with the diversity of nature, that is the biodiversity. And I realized that now, in our current world, there is a single legitimate way to experience nature that first is not consistent with the sustainable goals, second does not provide any place to the diversity of people, and third does not give any place to the diversity of nature. So my objective now and my current research question is how integrating nature in dominant social imaginaries and how to legitimate a diversity of social imaginaries that relate to nature. So here I define social imaginary on how people imagine their social existence, how they fit together with others, how things go on between them and their fellows, the expectations that are normally met, and the deeper normative notions and images that underlie all these expectations. Okay, so each one of us creates his or her own imaginary images, which are both conditioned by our memory and individual experiences, and that structures our way of doing now. And this personal and individual imaginary can interact with each other to construct and to build a social imaginary. This is my research context, but it's still not very much, well, I have to think about that more. So I will present very briefly three research programs I'm working on now. So the first is related to citizen science at school. We are working in that as part of the research program ReGreen, that is a European Age 2020 research program. So we are working with schools and children and teachers in Paris region. So for 2 years, we survey the potential impact of citizen science program at school for children from age 7 or 6 to 18. And so we survey the potential impact of this program on the representation of nature in children. So we try to avoid as much as possible top-down approaches, but of course we cannot do so completely just because children are at school. So in French, it's a completely top-down process. So this is the first program. The second one is dedicated, is linked to the magical show Le Bruit des Loups. So this show is an artwork designed by the magician Etienne Saglio. And this is Etienne Saglio designed this show very close to the social imaginary and cultural imaginary in French and European fairy tales. So you are in your seat, but then there is a forest appearing in the scene, and a forest with both appealing and threatening, with giants, wolves, bats, moving plants, and so on. And together with some of my colleagues, we try to assess how this could represent a vicarious experience of nature for the public, notably the children. And my third program is linked with artistic science fiction creation. So indeed, I think that artworks can be a good mediator between social sphere and individual sphere, because artistic creation, they both reflect some social norms, but they also refer to affects and emotions that are very individual. Then artistic creation refers to social imaginaries, and we can share them, and we can share them much more easily than our experience of nature. It's much more easy to say and to discuss about the film we have show and we have watched the last day, much easier than just because referring to the 5 minutes we just spend outside. So, and among arts, science fiction is interesting, well, actually interests me, because its aim is to invent a consistent future and consistent worlds. But the consistency of these worlds are not always the same as the scientific or rational consistency. And actually, some science fiction artists, they start inventing process by asking the question, what about if? And so through the science fiction creation and sharing, it could be possible to invent and share possible pathways for ecological and social transitions. So in this context, I started 3 years ago to propose to construct a science fiction group with a group of students every year and a group of artists, 4 to 6 artists, that create science fiction performance, objects, novels, and in specific themes that vary from one year to the others. So it's an ongoing process, and I cannot say now anything about the potential results right now because I don't have any, but I enjoy very much being with artists and students. And I hope it will have some very interesting results. And I cannot, to conclude, I just would like to to make all this conversation and all my thinking on the very more global context, and this context is the context of the IPBES. I don't know if you know the IPBES, but it's the International Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. So it's the same kind of the IPCC. IPCC is for the climate, and IPBES is for biodiversity and nature. And the IPBES made a very global assessment of the state of nature and biodiversity in 2019. And but this is the report is very large and huge, but there is 40 pages of summary for decision makers and for decision makers. And in this summary, the IPBES make 4 messages. And the message C is the following. And rest, I just quoted it. So the message C is that goals for conserving and sustainably using nature and achieving sustainability cannot be met by current trajectories, and goals for 2030 and beyond may only be achieved through transformative changes across economic, social, political, and technological factors. And transformative changes include, they said, a fundamental system-wide reorganization across technological, economic, and social factors, including paradigms, goals, and values. So this is very important message for decision makers, and that's why I hope the social imaginaries could be interesting in changing our paradigms and social values toward new transformative pathways towards sustainability.